to 1546 in Germany, and Galileo Galilei, who lived from 1564 to 1642. So he comes a little bit later. But to my mind, these three represent a sea change in the way that human beings in Western Europe began to recalibrate their relationship to everything. So Machiavelli, who's born first, writes a profoundly influential book out of Florence called The Prince. And The Prince is a contemplation on what real leadership, politically speaking, is. Now, the thinking about leadership before Machiavelli was that all legitimate leadership was divinely ordained. And this goes back to pagan times, but it's also a habit or a habitual way of thinking for Christians as well. Legitimate authority comes from God, and so you should obey the emperor because he is divinely ordained, or she is divinely ordained to rule your realm. What Machiavelli pointed out was that political power really is a technique. It is a talent. It is a way to manipulate the way people come to believe about the way they ought to act. And so famously, Machiavelli said things like, keep your friends close, but your enemies closer, or keep your enemies close, keep your friends closer. And in the middle of the book, he actually says something very interesting. He said, now, mind you, I'm writing to a knowing reader. This is not a book about good leaders of good people. It's a book about bad leaders of bad people. But what he was pointing out was that Florence, during his time, was so corrupt that he was trying to give us an operating manual for how to cope with the idea that bad people end up being led by bad leaders. I think it's been misread ever since it was written, in a sense. Now, if we turn to Martin Luther, so what we have with Machiavelli is sort of an earthquake, if you will, in the way that human beings think about where political power comes from. And if it's not divinely ordained, that makes it entirely secular. And it means that people who have power because they know how to get it and they know how to keep it. And it's got nothing to do with God. So that's item number one. In the realm of religion, Martin Luther, as you know, is the mover and shaker of the Protestant Reformation. And again, in the realm of morality, Martin Luther, like Machiavelli did with kings and emperors, said, look, the emperor has no clothes. It's all smoke and mirrors. Luther points that out about the Pope in Rome, that the Pope and the Western Church is completely corrupt, and the Church has been doing things that are anti-biblical and should not be followed. And so the Church is democratized by this movement by Luther. And the Pope loses his secular influence as well as his religious influence in the world. And then the third person I want you to consider is Galileo Galilei, who, picking up on the theories of Copernicus and with the invention of the telescope, which he perfected, he didn't invent it, but he perfected it, proved that there were moons orbiting the planet Jupiter. And when he documented these things, he also proved that the sun was spinning on an axis itself. It didn't just cross the sky, it also spun like planets spin on an axis. He identified the first sunspots, and he noted that they moved around on the surface of the sun. He took these discoveries, or actually evidence, of what he thought was really going on in the universe to the Church to try to prove to the Church that the sun was not the center of the universe, the Earth was not the center of the universe, but that the sun actually was. And Copernicus had opined that this was the case because his mathematical calculations regarding the movements of the planets got regularized when he discovered or came up with the idea that orbits are not perfectly circular, they're elliptical. And if he calculated that the Earth was not the center, but the sun was center, then everything worked out. So what you have in a span from 1469 to 1642 are three revolutions in thinking. A revolution in politics that says that authority does not come on earth from God. A revolution in religion that says that the central moral authority on the planet Earth is